Welcome to Inside Albania with me, Alice Taylor. This week, I interviewed Omar Eladil Beg Dukajini Zad to discuss Albanian nationalism versus patriotism, his family history, and why it is that Albanians are not so interested in uncovering the truth about their history. I also interviewed Andy Hojai, OBE, about a very controversial article published in the British right-wing media this week, which said that Albanians are most likely to commit sexual offences in the UK. This is going to be a controversial one. Stay tuned. I'm in Shëngjin in the north of Albania, a region once ruled over by the Dukajini family. The House of Dukajini is an Albanian noble family that presided over the Principality of Dukajini in northern Albania and western Kosovo during the 14th and 15th centuries. They may have been descendants of the earlier Progoni family, which founded the first Albanian state in recorded history, the Principality of Arbanon. Their most important holding was the city of Leisure and its castle, just a stone's throw away from here. But today, 700 years later, the family and its descendants can be found in all corners of the Mediterranean and even further afield. One particular branch of the descendants, the Eladil Dukajini Zad, is in Aleppo, Syria, where they built their home and continued their lineage. I decided to speak to Omar El Adil Beg Dukajini Zad, who has been painstakingly researching and compiling information on this family and other Albanian noble families for some 15 years. First of all, I mean, there are probably people listening to this and watching this who may not be familiar with the Dukajini name. They may not know about this family and its history. For them, can you give us a bit of an introduction to you, to the Dukajini family, and what it is to be a part of them?
Well, you want me to break down the name first? Because the name is it's kind of stacked over the years. Okay. So my name, I guess, if I want to be difficult, Omar Eladil Beg Dukajini Zada. And it doesn't matter if you say Omar Dukajini, that's fine. That's fine. It is. That's relevant. I make it difficult sometimes with the Zada part because the 50 people that know Ottoman history the Zada means son of, and then specifically means the family. Because the topographical area is named Dukajini after the family. And, well, let's just go with that. So, because there are people in Albania that use the term Dukajini to describe themselves. And then there's the Kanun, which is the laws that are named after Prince Leka Dukajini. So the family is like any other family, a noble family, a normal family. The area is named after, historic Dukajini is actually the Principality of Dukajini, which extends from Shëngjin, where you're at right now, that area, all the way past Prizren, almost to Pristina, and up to Peja. That anybody in there is technically from historic Dukajini. The people mostly nowadays in Albania that refer to themselves as from Dukajini is from like the highlands or the mountains area. Old Dukajini, there's Dukajini. Those are the fiefs or the clans that, the best way to describe them as when Lek took his army up into the mountains to fight till his last breath against the Ottomans, those were his men. Those were their families. They settled there, or at least that's kind of the story. And those are the people that still live there, the toughest up in the mountains. And then there are people that also call themselves Dukajini, but they're actually north of any territory that we would ever have control. So they're outside of historic Principality of Dukajini. North of that area, they were never really ruled by anybody. They would still refer to themselves as from Dukajini because they follow the Kanun. So they're really referring to the Kanun. And that's the different variations.
You grew up in the United States. Your family is from Syria, was based in Syria. How can you explain a bit for our audience how you went, or your family lineage, this branch of your family went from sort of being where I am now to Aleppo and then to the US?
Sure. So most people know, unfortunately, most people just know Lek Dukajini, Lek III. His father, most people make the mistake of saying he was the legal age. It's his father and his father's cousin, Paul and Nicholas. So it goes, Paul, Lecca had two sons, Stefano and Nicholas. He sent them to Italy. He went up to the mountains to fight till dying breath. Both his sons at different times came back to try to start rebellions. Nicholas, the first time he came, later on, much later on, Stefano did, both unsuccessful. Nicholas had two sons. Pregon came back in 1501 with one of Skanderbeg's grandsons, and the two brothers and Skanderbeg's grandson, with the Venetian help, mercenaries, tried another attempt at. They went down to Duras. They made it about that far and kind of fizzled out. Venice didn't supply. Typical Venice didn't supply all the troops they said they would. They didn't supply the money, and they made a deal with the Ottomans. They kind of made peace with the Ottomans. They all three, as they converted to Islam. I don't know. They were grown men at the time, so for them to find God in that all exact moment, that's questionable. But Pregon became Ahmed Pasha, where at the time he wasn't Pasha, he was a beg, the hereditary version of beg, like Skanderbeg. It's just lord. He made a deal. Part of the deal was with the Treaty of Zadrima, which I think is, for Catholics in Zadrima, it's important because that treaty actually lasted almost 300 years. Instead of Zadrima being having a pasha come in and rule it for the Sultan, it was an endowment directly to the Sultan. So they had to pay their taxes directly to the Sultan, but they didn't get taxed as much. And the bishop was actually in charge in the position of the pasha. So, and there was other little things like part of the treaty was that Albanians were allowed to carry their arms when in trade, which is usually when it wasn't allowed, and then in front of Ottoman officials. So this is conjecture, but Albanians were known for having a full arsenal all throughout Ottoman history, and that wasn't really allowed in other ethnicities. There was also another provision in there that some trade deals with the merchants in Vlora, and which sounded really strange to me, except for part of the arrangement. Again, this is a whole big thing. Was a marriage to Bayezid II's granddaughter, Sultan Bayezid II's granddaughter. But so her mother was Aisha Sultan, the princess, daughter of Bayezid II. But her father was actually an Albanian admiral, Sinan Pasha. From that point, he went to Romania as the Pasha of Romania. That was his first position. Wallachia at the time, I think it was called. And then later Anatolia. He worked his way up to Grand Vizier. There's actually 4 levels of Vizier, third, second, and then Grand Vizier. By 1514, he was at the Battle of Calderon with 20,000 cavalry. He was one of the people that accepted the surrender from the Shah. There was some drama because the Janissaries, who were mostly Albanian and Greek troops, didn't want to be there. They kept trying to rebel. They didn't want to be in that war at the time. They wanted to go back to Istanbul. And they'd burn some tents or cut the tents down or whatever of the other officers. And the Sultan kind of thought that it was Ahmed Pasha that might have been instigating it because they were as it's written, they were a little more loyal to him, being that he was from an actual Albanian royal family than the Pasha, to the Sultan. So he had him executed. Actually, he killed him himself. That was the first. His son, Mehmed Pasha, not affected actually by the outcome of that. His mother was the granddaughter of Bayezid II. Became later on the governor of Aleppo. At that point, he married another Ottoman imperial princess. He was somehow we got a lot of land. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, either through marriage or putting down a rebellion. At that point, he doubled the size of the city, almost doubled the size of the city. So he set up an endowment, which is called a waqf or a vakaf in Turkish, where you build a mosque and you attach a commercial property to pay for the mosque. However you want to write that, the original the person that endows it, however they write the excess funds, that's what you do. You want to feed kittens with the excess money, you want to build an orphanage, you want to do whatever, or all the excess money can go to the family. Because in Islam, the first charity is the family. So he did it all. He built a massive, he doubled the size of the city, the commercial buildings, and he put the excess funds that would after paying the mosque to go to the family. So that has sustained us for the last 480 years. To this day, we still own it. We still own the properties. Obviously, the war in Syria has damaged them. The next generation, Ahmed Bey, actually was the Pasha of Skodra, not Pasha, the governor of Skodra for a little bit. For the most part, we've been in Aleppo other than our positions throughout the empire since then. At the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell, my great-grandfather, who was a little older at that time, past military age, he, with a new interim government under the French mandate, he was the Minister of Labor and Public Works for a little bit. Like say he was the richest man of Aleppo, but that's what they called him.
You have a pretty impressive extent, like knowledge of your family history, you know, and I know that not just from the conversation now, but the conversation we had before. And I wanted to ask you, you know, and I mean, even when we first spoke, I said to you, you know, I've read everything on your website, whether I remember it or not is a different matter, but I've read it all thoroughly several times. And I remember you said you were surprised, and you said that even members of your family had not read it.
Of course.
And that leads me also to another point that, you know, Albanian people, in my view, are super patriotic and super proud of being Albanian and their history and things. But when it comes to actually researching and trying to find out more, they don't really seem to do that. And I just wondered what your perspective on that is and why you think they are not that interested in really going any deeper.
Okay. Let's talk about my family first. My family's like every other family. So Aleppo, the old city, we had thousands of hectares of land outside of it. Very similar to like the War family before communism. It is the rock that kept us there, but it's also ball and chain. And some of my family want to kick that loose and have, because it's a responsibility. Right now, there was a war, it's damaged, we have to repair that. That's the rest of our life. The next couple of generations to repair that, get that going. And it took several generations. Like Mehmed Pasha built it. He died before it was ever finished. You know, his kids and his grandkids were there to see it completed. Plus their own public works in other parts of Razgrad, Bulgaria, and in Kosovo or in Prizren. So some of them want to sell. And unfortunately, I'm not. We're so intertwined with the percentages. Everybody has to agree to it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So
that's a very Albanian situation, by the way.
That's what I mean. We're just like every other family. Everybody probably in Albania has that one house. We just have more of that. We have a big chunk of a city. Some people want to tear it down and build a hotel. Other people want to repair it. You know, it's old cooler or something. They want to build it back up with its old glory. Everybody has a different perspective on it. One out of every 5 members of the family might feel historic desire to have it in its original condition, and the rest want the modern life. First of all, nationalism, it's not nationalism. It's ethnic nationalism. Because nationalism is something different. Albania is too broken up to be nationalist. You can't say everybody just from that country. Ethnic nationalists, I really want to get into that, but it's a whole big conversation. Ethnic nationalism, it's a modern concept. Traditional Albanian rules on ethnic identity are very simple. Male line, bloodline, you're from your father's family. That's it. Ethnic nationalism was started in the 18th century by the German, really Prussian. And its sole intention was to move power away from the monarchy and the church. So to do that, they had to find another reason to create what's a state? What is it? What makes a people? And he came up with the idea that it's the language of the common people. So that whole intention was to move power away from the nobility. And that spread like cancer. That's when you had fascism. It was a precursor really to socialism as well. It was a slightly socialist movement. And that spread throughout Eastern Europe. You don't really have it in like America. You don't have, obviously there's too many different people. Zionism came out of that. Herzl was a big fan of it. Pan-Arab nationalism, tried Turkish nationalism came out of that, which is, pretty hardcore stuff. And that's what Albanians kind of have, but it does not fit with traditional Albanian traditionalism. It doesn't really mesh. Because it's hard to, when you take modern political concepts and try to superimpose them on history, they don't work. That's why I think people have trouble reading. If you objectively, like you weren't involved in, you weren't Albanian, you read Albanian history, you're fine. You have no problem reading Albanian history. I'll give you an example why. One is Albanians are going to take sides. And you can't take sides with Albanian history because it's the same people fighting each other in a lot of situations. I'll give you an example. So around like his generation, there's a report from, I think it was a Venetian priest from Skodra. Skodra was part of Venice at the time. And it was pretty much just, who came in and invaded and burned the place down? It's just waves of different people. The Branković family from the Serbians came and they burned the villages. They took the people, they took the livestock, right? Lord Nicholas Ducagini came, burned the villages, killed the people, took the livestock. Another Serbian came in to Dragan Ducagini, which is the other brother of came in, and Albanians will read that and go, how? Those are other fellow Albanians. It's a different state. It's a different country. That concept doesn't. But if Albanians are reading Italian history, which were also city-states, they were separate states, and the Venetians and whatever next to them, the Sicilians, that's really far away. We're fighting each other. Oh, that's war. That happens. So if you're taking modern ethnic nationalism and you're going, okay, well, we're going to superimpose that on principalities, and you have the Bolsha family and the Muzaka and the Ernadi I want to say the closest ones are the Ducagini and Castrati, but we really didn't fight each other like that. We were actually pretty close. Even when we weren't agreeing, we didn't do that to each other. But us and the Bolsha, it's violence across Albanian violence. And that's normal in that era of history. And if you take modern nationalism and you take that and you superimpose that, Serbians did it to each other too. The Serbs did it. That's just the Balkans. That's just the medieval era that happened in England with the different hordes. They fought each other for power. Even if you go in the Ottoman era, the different fees, the different clans in Albania, they fought each other for land. That fits the traditional Albanian traditionalism is micro to macro. There is no individualism. The first unit is your family. That's the most important. Nationalism, not such a big deal. It's there. But it's your family, your extended family, your community, your nation, whatever that is. That could be, if you have a separate, and then all Albanian people, and then maybe the world.
So
but it comes in an order.
I'm curious, I understand what you're saying, but I know there's a lot of people who are going to not agree with what you're saying. There's that saying, the only religion of Albanians is Albania. This concept of being Albanian, what is that to you? Do you consider yourself an Albanian in any definition of the word?
In the traditional ethic, traditionalism, Albanian traditional, absolutely, yeah. Male bloodline, my family's kept their identity the whole time, absolutely. If you say nationalism, I'm not a citizen of Albania. I could get citizenship. Do I speak Albanian? That's ethnic nationalism. That's the definition of ethnic nationalism is language. That's Turkish nationalism, the same thing, even though they're not. There are all kinds of stuff. I don't speak Albanian. And Loris Castroti from the Castroti family, he speaks Italian.
My father is Welsh. I was not born in Wales. I don't speak Welsh, but his family for centuries are Welsh, completely Welsh, not English, not sort of mixed around or anything like that. So therefore, there are some people that would say, well, you weren't born there and you don't speak the language, so you can't call yourself Welsh. But I still insist that I have a long line of Welsh heritage.
So, but if you were following the traditional rules, I don't know what the traditional rules. Every ethnicity has their own set of traditional rules. That's the thing. So, like the Jewish people, it's their mother's line. If their mother's not Jewish, they're not Jewish. So you have to follow whatever the traditional. Albanian traditionalism is actually very clear cut. Albanian history is somewhat violent between different parties that are technically Albanian, all parties involved. And how to unify? That was the thing. They were facing the country breaking up. It was under the Ottoman Empire, but they were facing it being dissolved into Greece, into Serbia, and possibly Italy. So how do you get the people to unify? And that was what they were coming up with. That is to create a central figure, national hero, Skanderbeg, and kind of model it around ethnic nationalism, which was the concept at the time anyways, for a lot of places throughout Europe. So, and it kind of works. It kind of works. It comes up with a short list of problems. But if you're reading Albanian history with that concept, you're going to run into a lot of things that don't seem right, that are like, oh, is it Albanians killing other Albanians? But it's really two different principalities or two different clans. Or, like even the Ottomans coming in, that was the Bolsha versus the Topoli family. We're trying to wait. What did the Toptani family say they came from? The Tapia family. So it was the war between the Tapia and the Bolsha. The Tapia invited the Ottomans. That's what brought the Ottomans in to fight the Bolsha. So you're like, oh, they brought the Ottomans to fight other Albanians. And they just stayed. So that's just the norm. That was the norm at that time. It was... People aren't going to like that, but that's the history.
No.
History is violent.
But I want to ask you about something else slightly controversial as well. Not controversial. I studied law, and I find the canon of Lek Dukagjini, as it is so called, although you've said previously that he probably didn't actually write it.
Most I don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah. But I want to, as someone who has an interest in law, I find it fascinating. I find it a very valuable piece of history in terms of law. But whenever I mention it, people seem to be sort of ashamed of it. They want to play it down. They don't want to talk about it. They call it barbaric. And okay, yes, there are some pretty barbaric pieces of it, but it served a purpose at a time, a time that is very, very different to now. And I want to ask your view on its relevance, its impact, its perception.
But a lot of times it's shown in a light as in a time of lawlessness without a government. And that's not true, because these clans have their own governments. If you actually get into their structure, not just the Bayrektor, which is but they have a whole hierarchy of different members and elders. And, communism did a lot to break that down. That some of them still have it. But a lot of people don't. They don't even know who the Bayrektor is. They have no idea. No idea who their elders are. So when they cherry pick things from the Kanun and they go, oh, this person did this to me, so I get to... You don't get to do that. You're supposed to follow a procedure. Are you following that procedure? Have you followed all the other rules that you're supposed to follow? No. So you're supposed to go to your elders, or you're supposed to, depending on what part, because everybody's a little different. Every clan's a little different. We're obviously talking about like blood feuds. That's the main one, right? Although there's marriage laws, there's a lot of laws on hospitality. Rules on hospitality. There's a whole myriad of different rules that people don't really follow. So the main one is Besa, which is great. I think that's an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing. But they're not announcing that they're going to be the one taking the blood. They're not going through the procedure and the steps that they're supposed to go through. They're not giving the other party. There's a whole process, and it's complex. And they're just going, oh, one day, most people don't know. They're just, oh, I'm going to get my vengeance. And there's a procedure for that. And they're supposed to follow it with their elders through that process. And it's a little different for each one. And there's a hierarchy. But most of these younger people do not even know who those people are. And they don't care. They really just don't. Because then they're accountable to follow the rules. If they were going to listen to their elders, they'd have to listen to their elders, which I think they should be doing, by the way. The problem is not that the laws were barbaric. It's that people aren't following the process. Everything does evolve, though, by the way. To say, the Kanun wasn't written down in oral history, to say that it didn't evolve and change over time is not true. So I don't think Albanians should be apologetic or ashamed of their old rules or their traditions or their history. The Balkans were a volatile place. We would not be here. We would not be alive. The Serbs would have come and slaughtered us. The Greeks would have absorbed us. The Venetians and Italians would have taken us over. Instead, we were a military people. We served as soldiers from the time of Alexander the Great, to the Romans, to the Byzantines, to the Ottomans, and we survived. So to be ashamed of any part of our history to want to be something else. Like I mentioned, not everybody in my family wants to necessarily keep up the traditions. And that's the only reason we're here still to this day. So I don't think we should be apologetic.
Okay, so going on to another question, you have done a huge amount of research. I'm wondering, is this rabbit hole ongoing? Is there more to be discovered? And, you know, you've been to Albania a few times now. How has your coming here sort of aligned with your research? Has it met your expectations? Have there been surprises? Has it helped you in any way?
So the research, I mean, it's been my whole life, but the last 15 years is pretty intense. There is a whole network, mostly a diaspora of people that are actively digging, and we kind of a network. We share stuff. Actual historians, I send stuff to. I run across some stuff that was in the archives in Naples that I sent off that was important. A lot of this stuff needs to be translated, and that's unfortunately there's no funding in Albania for stuff like that, and you know the historians don't get paid very much. My family in particular, I mean, I did all this research because growing up, my dad kept saying, one of these days I'm going to get a book together with all our history because there's so much history. And I just kept hearing it and he never did it. So I'm like, I'm going to do it. And I spent, 15 years doing it with a lot of help from a lot of people all over the world, really. Albanians that helped and put this together. I like the website. I didn't write a single piece of that. I helped with the research. An actual anthropologist wrote all that stuff. But it's academically kind of dry. I would have probably embellished some of the stuff, made it more of a story, but no, it's academically sound because an academic wrote it. I'm going to continue to read because I like to read. I read 6 books at a time. I'm constant. I love history. I've moved on, and so I'm learning a lot about the northern fees, the northern tribes, the complexities of them. I'm learning more modern Albanian history and the history of the countries around it. You cannot learn Albanian history without learning the surrounding countries because it's all kind of written in medieval Italian, Latin, Ottoman Turkish. Nobody ever looks at the Ottoman Turkish records. The Vatican has a lot of stuff that's still got to be uncovered. But for my family in particular, I mean, I've kind of covered everything. I can get into the nitty gritty, the boring stuff, because not every generation has an exciting life. I can document all their, they were a notary or something, or they just were wealthy because they collected the rent and they did nothing. I could put their name down. That's fine. I don't want that to be the rest of my life. But I love history. I definitely want to contribute to more of that. There are the Castroti family are still around there. They live in Italy, like in Italy. Loris Castrota Skanderbeg is the head of that family. They're now called the Castrota Skanderbeg family. I've talked to them. The Musacchio family in Italy, the Bolsh family in Bulgaria. No, Romania. I'm sorry, Romania. I always mix those two up. I haven't talked to those. And my trips to Albania, they're busy because I don't stay in the same place. And I never just go to Albania. I go to Albania and Kosovo. They're the same thing to me. It's the north. Every day I'm in a different city usually. And I've been trying to meet anybody that messages me that if we can fit them in, I'll stop by and I'll have coffee with them or talk. Usually they talk about their family, that's great. I get to learn a little bit about everybody. But I've been also meeting with, I met with the Vora family a couple trips ago. They invited me down there. I met with one of the John Marco family in Merdita. I met with one of the top Tani. I've met with I talked to a couple different directors from different fees. The Begoli family, I've met with quite a few of them in Pea. And I've been through this, I've kind of, there's no organization with all the old families, the Ottoman era and previously. And I've kind of come to the conclusion, that maybe we should get everybody together and create some sort of council or with the directors from the Northern Fees and all the historic families from medieval history all throughout Ottoman era to the modern times, because nobody's recording this stuff. Nobody's keeping track of this stuff. The modern government does not care about this stuff. The Northern Fees, their history, if they don't write it down, it's going to be lost. There needs to be some sort of interaction with all these different groups that, given the way Albania is, with diasporas all over the world, they're spreading apart. We're spreading more further and further apart. There's less and less connection. And there needs to be a coming back to some sort of something central. And I feel, at least on my part, it's maybe getting some of these different families to talk to each other. because I've been bouncing around talking to different ones, and they all kind of have the same kind of, they're talking about the same stuff. They're just not talking to each other.
There are some people, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I know, I read comments about the prince here and things like that. And they're like, there is this train of thought. And this is coming from the UK as well, where we have our monarchy in a very ingrained class system. And there is this train of thought, leave this sort of family structure in history, history, okay, report it, but no one is better than anyone else because of their family or their blood. This is something, coming from the UK that I hear a lot as well. And I hear it mentioned in relation to the prince here. And I just wondered, this council, are people not going to sort of say, oh gosh, they're going to plot to take over? Why are they more important than us? How do you counter this?
Why would the government say it's political? Why would, if we can't get together and record our histories and interact with each other, that doesn't make sense. I mean, who said it's anything political? And by the way, Lek is the only one that when I offered him, I told him this, he said he wants nothing to do with it. So everybody else has been on board. So, I'm not gonna say anything else about that. But
it's not you're planning to take over. It's
I'm not the guy.
Preserving history.
I don't even speak Albanian. Nobody's gonna accept me as they're still gonna look at me as an outsider, regardless of my family bloodline. I talked to the Begoli family. I know the Bushati family and them have old. They're not talking to each other. Shala doesn't talk to the Begoli. I've talked to the Shala. I've talked to. Well, why don't we just get everybody together? Because I, for the most part, can talk between everybody. That my family hasn't been there. We have no animosity with anybody, and vice versa. And by the way, when I talk to these families, they have the same complaints. They all feel like the modern government is leaving them out of the history books. All the stuff they did for Albanian history, for Albanian people, is being ignored. They're left out of it. So, if the government's going to say, oh, that could be political, and labor unions can be political. Any group of people getting together and voting in the same way can be political. But can you imagine of it getting together and agreeing on anything? No, that's not going to happen. Just get them together and argue for a little bit. And maybe, it's to preserve the history, it's to preserve traditions, it's to preserve the concept. There was the Council of Dukagjini, which is the 1950s, which was to actually rebel, but it was just the northern tribes to rebel against the communists. Before that, it was the League of Prison, over 100 years ago. That's just traditional Albanian rules are councils where people, representative comes from different families to meet and talk. And that's how things used to be done for thousands of years. And it just hasn't been done. And mostly because, communist era kind of restricted that sort of thing. We don't have those restrictions anymore. And it wouldn't just be Albanians. There's Albanians in Italy, in all the surrounding countries, in Turkey. The Gika family used to rule Romania. There's some of them in England now. These are all influential historical Albanian families that should be included in some sort of, and not just the upper echelon. There's a strata of local leaders and families that have held it together for the local communities, and they should all be included. We shouldn't lose the structure that kept us here for thousands of years. Not everybody is privileged enough to keep their history. You have to be kind of in a position of power or wealth for history to record you. That's just the way it is. Land records, tax records, that sort of thing. So it used to be that these families were the pillar that all the surrounding families said, I'm one with them and they've been here forever, so I'm here forever. Kosovo was disputed. Try to explain the Albanian presence before the Ottoman era without bringing up the families that ruled, the Albanian families that ruled there. The Serbs claim our family too. The Serbs claim the Kastroti, they claim the Bolsha, they claim my family. If we're not here to say we're not Serbian, we're Albanian, who's to say? It's the Albanian word versus the Serbian word. So I think that's important, at least as a novelty. It's a part of a foundation stone that's set, that shows that the presence has been there for a very long time.
Andy, welcome back to Inside Albania. Thank you for joining me to discuss this topic, which has really got under my skin this week. I think it has yours as well. Before we dive into it, hello and Happy New Year.
Thank you for inviting me, and Happy New Year to you too.
Right, so this week, the British right-leaning newspaper, I think it's fair to say right-leaning, aligned with the Conservative Party, newspaper The Telegraph, has stirred quite a big debate in Albania and in the UK. Now, it published an article which it said was based on data originally from the Home Office and the police forces, which shows that foreign nationals are 3 times more likely to be arrested for sexual offences as British citizens. And beyond this, it said that Albanians are the most likely to be arrested, followed by Afghans, Iraqis, Algerians. Now, this follows on from an article that was published in October, I think it was, which was saying that, Albanians are among the most incarcerated in British prisons, in UK prisons. And the data that they show, they have these nice tables and they say, well, it comes from the Home Office and it comes from this source or whatever. But it's not that straightforward, is it? I have some problems with the data that was published. One, I couldn't find the source of the information myself published anywhere except in a chart that the Telegraph had posted. So I wasn't able to look at all of the data that was collected, just what they had picked. And it leaves out the fact, and this is something I think which is you only really understand if you're familiar with Britain. And this is the fact that this data is based on passports. So people who hold Albanian nationality, people who hold Iraqi nationality. What it doesn't look at is people who are dual citizens or who have lived in the UK and have acquired citizenship through naturalization or marriage, of which there are many. And I believe that if you look at the data through a lens of not just the passport, but the nationality and the country of origin, the data is in fact very, very different, tells a very different story. That's my 2 cents on it. What do you think?
Well, you sort of laid out quite well a number of issues, but to sort of go back to the articles that was published, and it has stirred a major debate in Albania, but also in the UK about the numbers and its interpretation. Now, the article says that it claims that they have published this report by a think tank, which is close to the Conservative as well as the Reform Party. Now, if you go to the website of this think tank, we don't find the full report, so it's very difficult for us to make a comparative study on this. But what I find it quite problematic with this presentation of the information is that it says they've inquired this information from 52 out of 53 police centers. Mm-hmm. And they say that Albanians are likely, so they put the number on emphasis that are likely to conduct a sexual assault, which is the most problematic narrative that I've put out. Now, I had a look at the Office for National Statistics to find out where the sexual assault has happened in 2024, and the top 10 regions are either in Yorkshire, in Leeds, in Birmingham, and in Hull. Now, if we compare with the statistics where Albanians live in the UK, over 80% live in London. Mm-hmm. And when we look at regions, London does not feature at all in the top 10. In fact, it are the top most safest places in the UK. So if you're going to claim that Albanians are most likely to commit sexual assault, then one must say that they live in this area where the national statistics claims where the highest rate of sexual assault took place last year, as well as the crime. So that for me just doesn't really up, and then I could not really as serious as you go along. Now, of course, the article in the study focuses and says that Albanians are the largest foreign national in the UK prisons. Now, just to break that down, out of 10 people, 9 are British citizens in the UK prisons, and then the rest are so-called with other nationalities. Now, Albanians do, in fact, feature as the top number, but when we look at the number, this year it was 1,400, and in the last 4 to 5 years, there have been between 800 to 1,500. And then you have the Polish and so on. But what these articles sort of do, they just take away that Albanians are the highest number, and then they make it as a sensation. And then, of course, the narrative then fits very well with the anti-migrant narrative and so on. But just to sort of also put it into focus to folks at home, is in the UK at the moment, there is a big debate about gang rapes and something that has terribly happened 15 years ago, where the police and prosecution failed to protect people that were sexually assaulted. And what made it more worrying is that they did not believe the victim that came forward. And what they're trying to do sort of is because, you know, the sort of conservative right-wing media have been going after the Albanians. They are trying now to link it with this sort of new narrative that is taking place, that somehow foreigners are engaged in this massive rape gangs in the UK, which is still being investigated, and it's very irresponsible to kind of put different groups into this conversation.
The Conservatives are in opposition now, so they're even more viciously going after, you know, this narrative, which is very effective at dividing the population and galvanizing far-right voters, and also using it to attack the left-wing, the centre-left governing party at the moment, which is working in some ways for them. But this is important nuance to note as well, you know, that they're in opposition and they're really trying to get back to where they were before. You were saying about the prevalence of Albanians in prisons. And there is another nuance that I wanted to bring to the table here as well, which is, and I have spoken to Albanians who have been returned from the UK after being in prison. And yes, there are Albanians in the UK who go there and do illegal things and should be punished as such. But there are Albanians who have gone to the UK in various different manners, have ended up being forced or coerced into illegal activity, have been trafficked, and then have been arrested for that and imprisoned. So among those in prison, and it's not just Albanians, there are, and this is, I'm on the board of a charity that works with human trafficking victims. It is a problem, it is a fact that victims of different forms of trafficking can end up being incarcerated for the thing that they were trafficked to do. This is a fact as well. Do you not think?
Absolutely, and you're right. But just to sort of expand on it, at the moment, what is really happening is that the opposition here are trying to move forward the anti-migrant narrative. And in particular, it's being fueled by Elon Musk, because he's intervening in UK politics and he's kind of offering a megaphone on his platform. And he's even, in fact, offering £100 million in the next campaign. And you have now the different political parties that are fighting for that sort of money. And since he's been promoting this anti-migrant narrative, this is then where it is kind of driving up. But when we go to the statistic and to the point that you are making, it's absolutely, there are a number of Albanians that do commit crimes and they should be punished as such, and they should be brought into account for it. And everyone is responsible for their action, and the whole community doesn't really have to pay a price. But you also have victims that have been coerced. You have people that have been trafficked, and some of them do end up in the system. And unfortunately, some of them even ended up to taking their own lives because they could not live with the shame being trafficked to the UK and then being locked up. And that unfortunately didn't really resonate a lot in the public discourse, and it was kind of brushed on the side. But I'm really grateful that you're offering the platform that we can actually discuss and raise these issues.
So in the article, that we have this data, but you have concerns that not that it's false data, false information. I'm not going to accuse the Telegraph of publishing false information, but data that has perhaps been cherry-picked or doesn't tell the whole story. Do you have any other concerns about what has been laid out in the article as fact?
Well, what my concern is, it's cherry-picking. And it's kind of putting the narrative that Albanians, because they have been incarcerated in the past and because they have been arrested as such, they are most likely to engage in sexual assault and other crime in the year moving forward. And what the article is trying to do is to say, well, before the Home Office and the Office for Statistics releases the statistics for 2024 in the coming weeks, this is what we found out. And they are trying to sort of shape that narrative, which is problematic, and that is concerning. And if you look throughout the article, it's very much a position paper. And if you look at it towards the end, they end up by saying that all those that are foreigners, they should return home. So that is concerning, because they are really fueling a negative picture.
It also mentioned, and this surprised me a bit, it mentioned, I can't remember exactly the wording, something like they come from places that don't respect women. And like, I think they threw the word Muslim in there somewhere as well, talking about these countries. And I was like, is this an op-ed? Or, you can't say that you don't respect, I was so surprised when I saw that Albanians were supposedly, these perpetrators of mass sexual offences in the UK. Because, like, as a woman living here, it's the issue of sexual. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not being naive, but I've been treated with more respect here as a woman, like in public, and when it comes to these sort of things, than I was in countries like Malta and Cyprus. I was very surprised to read this. I think there was a lot of opinion woven in with that, like mentioning, they come from countries that don't respect women, and throwing the word Muslim around, which is like waving a red flag to some people.
That is also the narrative that the former Home Secretary has portrayed it. And it seems like Albanian, it's very convenient for them to sort of put it into this equation, because they have sort of put this forward, this debate that migrants that come from this country, and particularly those related to the rape gang and so-called the debate that is happening in the UK. The article is sort of claiming, well, actually, there are also Albanians as part of this problem, because this is what our statistics say. So it's very ill-meaning in the way how they are sort of portrayed it. And what is also concerning is that I have reached out to the center, as well as the Telegraph, as well as to the Times, that have reported if we can write a response to it. But so far, I haven't really gotten a response out, because if we really want to engage in this public debate, we should also offer the opportunity to respond. And that just really shows. But we will see if they will come back next week.
Did the center reply to you at all? Were you able to get any further information out of them?
No, I've put forward an official request to look at the report they're claiming, because if you go into their website,
it's not there.
We do not see any publication whatsoever. Also checked it, and I put forward an official report if I could have a copy of it, and I haven't heard, although I saw the director of the report talking about it on GP News last night as some sort of revelation that they found out.
So just to clarify, the data that is quoted by the Telegraph, you have requested and officially requested a copy of the report that is quoted by the Telegraph, and no one has replied to you.
That's absolutely correct.
I think that says it all, unfortunately. And it makes me very sad to see Albanians being used as a scapegoat for political games again by my country. It's been 3 years of this now, it makes me quite ashamed to be British sometimes.
I think it's a great shame that again sort of bringing in the narrative, but it has resonated, unfortunately, bad with the right-wing voters and with the right media, and it's kind of a convenient example to bring it in. And we can see more or less every single week one of the politicians or the media are bringing Albania as an example, because it kind of fits exactly the narrative that they're doing.
Yes. Andy, thank you very much for your time. Please keep me updated if you do receive a response or the right of reply. As you mentioned, I'd be very interested to follow up on it. Thank you again.
Indeed. Thank you very much for the invite.
That's all for this week. You can watch Inside Albania every Saturday at 4 o'clock on Euronews Albania, on our YouTube channel, Euronews Albania On Demand, and across all major podcasting platforms. Until next week, Mira Pavchim.